How's the microphone? Yes, I never use a microphone, so I'm totally unaccustomed. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Casello, and I am, at least for the next 4 weeks, the Associate Vice President for Graduate Studies and Postdoctoral Affairs here at the university. I look after all of the university's graduate programs across the campus. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here tonight. I should also tell you that I am here in the Faculty of Environment. I'm in the School of Planning, and I'm joint appointed with the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And so like all of you, I think a lot about sustainability. For me, sustainability comes in the form of transportation systems. So I am regularly working, trying to get more of our colleagues and friends and society really to think more carefully about their transportation choices and thinking less about their private automobile, at least their single occupancy automobile, and thinking about how they might use mass transportation or walking and cycling or e-bikes or other modes of transportation to reduce their carbon footprint. So I do have, I think, the same overarching goal to make society a better place and perhaps a less carbon intensive place than it is now. I'm thrilled to be here. We normally start these events with a territorial acknowledgement. As you know, the University of Waterloo is situated on Indigenous peoples' land. This is the Haudenosaunee. This is the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people's land on which we sit, and the peoples of the First Nation. And we have a kind of a typical land acknowledgement that we do that I don't really love. So I often think about it in a different way. And one of the things that is really important about Indigenous peoples, of course, is their relationship with their land and relationship with nature. And as I think about all of us in this room, we have been thinking quite a lot about how humans and how our activities interact with nature and interact with the land. And as I think further about that, I think all of us can rightly consider ourselves to be knowledge keepers in the area of climate change and in climate expertise. And with that designation as a knowledge keeper comes a responsibility. It comes a professional responsibility, a personal responsibility to act in the way that we truly believe. And I think if you're all here celebrating your 10th anniversary or the 10th anniversary of this program, it's probably because you believe in those things and you act in those ways. So you are acting on your knowledge keeping, and you are probably setting out the message around what it means to be a climate professional. So thanks for doing that. I'm here just to bring welcome on behalf of the university. I just wanted to say a couple things about how we're thinking about Waterloo and Waterloo's role in society. We have a new president, so he joined us about 18 months ago. Vivek Goel is his name, and Vivek is challenging the University of Waterloo to move beyond what universities and probably your company does, and that's 5-year sort of strategic plans. And he's asking us to think about how will Waterloo continue to be impactful in 2057. So that's 30 years from now. So I think it's time for us to think differently about how we deliver education and what the outcomes are going to be from that education. And what Vivek is asking and what the community is thinking about is something that he's calling the futures. So what are the futures that we can affect as the University of Waterloo? And one of those futures is a sustainable future, along with a healthy future and so on, an economic future, social futures and so on. And what's happening from the university's perspective, and really, I think, part of what the conversations I was fortunate enough to have outside was really about how this degree and how we might reshape this degree or continue to rethink our academic programming might allow us to be more impactful and be more future looking and be actually even more thoughtful in the way we deliver academics to affect the kinds of changes that we want to see. So I had a conversation with some master's students who were saying that they're in the School of Financial Management and they really want to apply that accounting tools to environmental problems. And I had some conversations about others who really stopped their career, put it on hold, and now are rethinking about what comes next. But they know they're interested in climate, and they're trying to figure out how to make things right. And so what's happening here today is we're celebrating 10 years of a novel program, but I want you to know that we're continuing to think about the novelty of this program and think about the impact of this program. And I can imagine a place where our colleagues from the climate change, and I saw Sarah Birch is here. Sarah, of course, global expert in climate change, along with my colleague Dan, who is also a global expert, and our friends Richard Kelly and Paul Parker, who I think, well, all of you have probably been influenced by their expertise along the way. So, you know, all of us here, we're thinking these things, and now we're thinking about how we meld research and through the Climate Institute, into research graduate programs, into undergraduate programming, and into new novel programmings. And we'll just launch a diploma in climate change. I won't get the title right, but it's a new diploma. And any graduate student who is at the University of Waterloo who wants to leave with a credential in climate change can take 4 additional courses in that area, offered largely here in the Faculty of Environment, and leave with that designation. So what we think that means is, if you're a civil engineering student, if you are a accounting student, if you are a biology student, and you want to get that mixture of your disciplinary expertise but apply it to climate change, you can do that now through the Faculty of Environment. And these are the kinds of things that continue to evolve at the university. So I'm super excited about what we've been able to achieve. I'm more excited about what you all have been able to achieve, and I'm really grateful that you've come back to spend a Saturday night with us and tell us more about how hopefully we've helped you a little bit professionally and how we can continue to do that. So thank you all very much for coming. It's really my pleasure to be here. And now I will turn it over to Dan.
All right, all good back there? Dr. Parker listening. I always wanted to say that just once. I'll be on this side, this side. Anyway, I'm up on the screen. Okay, so those of you that don't know me, I'm Daniel Scott. I've run the. Thank you. I have one fan. I'll pay you later, Marion. But I have the honor of hosting or moderating the panel. I do want to say a couple things before we get started with the proceedings. Just to build on a couple things that Jeff said. I think he mentioned we have 250-ish, I think 40 something. Tricia gave me a number, MCC graduates over the last 10 years. And the important thing from that too, and in addition to that, in terms of capacity building, they've come from 24 different countries over that time frame. So the vision we had 15 years ago of creating a program that could build capacity in a Canadian context, which is what our panel will talk about today, we also had that hope that we could make it a type of program that could build capacity overseas internationally as well. So that's been a huge success. And I do want to just add to Jeff's point, he's too humble to say it. But on a personal note, thank him for championing or leading the new graduate diploma that we have that's coming in August or in September. It now allows University of Waterloo to be the only university in Canada where every undergrad, regardless of program, wow, they're good at this. Every undergrad, regardless of program, and now every graduate student, regardless of program, have a clear pathway that they can be climate literate and develop climate expertise before they graduate. So we're the only shop in Canada that can say that. There we go. So thank you for that, Jeff. Onto our program. Jeff also did a great job of setting some of the context of why we're here to celebrate, not just the 250 or so alumni, but the expansion of the programs and the impact of those programs have had. I think everybody in this room probably can agree that climate change requires a whole of society, which is a term you probably hear lots, approach. And to do so, you need talent in basically every profession. Now we can legitimately say pretty much every job, at least partially, has some climate job. As Jeff said, whether you're in finance, whether you're in engineering, whether you're in transportation, tourism like myself, they all have to have both either climate literacy or some level of expertise. And education and capacity building has been part of both the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, but the Paris Climate Agreement for some time. And yet every year we have reports either out of a country, out of a new think tank or a different sector that tells us we have a climate skills or a climate talent gap, which is what we're going to talk about today. And even just this morning, some of you may have seen it too, LinkedIn had a new analysis. 1 in 8, they estimate, have the green or climate skills for a low carbon economy and the new economy that's coming. So, and they also within that identified a gender gap, which was really important to see. I hadn't seen that type of analysis before. The good news, and our federal colleagues might be able to speak to this a little bit, the Sustainable Jobs Act passed its 3rd reading in April, nodding heads, good, in April. So that's the good news. The challenge, and Jeff pointed to this a little bit, is when you read that act, there's the word universities does not appear in it, nor does post-secondary education. So what is our role, to your point, Jeff? We need to be part of this solution, but what is the role of universities? What is the role of post-secondary education in moving that forward? So how do we bridge this gap, these gaps as a group? And we are extremely fortunate. We have an amazing panel, diverse backgrounds in terms of mitigation, adaptation, climate science, skills of the future, you name it, we've got it here for you. And these experts are going to discuss that strategic challenge and where does Canada need to be in 10 years, but also what is the role of universities in getting Canada to that place. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists one by one. And Bonnie's live, good. Bonnie, can you hear us? Awesome. I'm going to introduce them one by one, and then I'll give them the floor for about 5 minutes so they can get their remarks, a couple key points on the table that they want to talk about. I've got a couple of questions as moderator's privilege that I'd love to ask them. So I'll ask a couple of those, then we'll open the floor to all of you that can follow up with some questions. And then afterwards, we have the reception. We can move out to do that as well. So I'm going to start with our bio. So I'm going to start with you, Bonnie. That's all right. So Bonnie is a manager of research and training. She's live from Ottawa, just so you know, saving carbon. Awesome, good. Manager of research and training at the new Strategic Environmental and Economic Analysis Secretariat at Environment and Climate Change Canada. That's a mouthful. But I'm hoping she'll tell us a little bit about the new secretariat, which aims to provide decision makers with the information needed to ensure government programs and policies align with Canada's climate economic inclusivity goals. Her team is importantly supporting Canada's COP28 pledge to train 30,000 public and servants, so that's 10% of the federal service-ish, on climate change. And I think she's working with Sarah, so maybe they say a few words about that. Dustin, next on my list, most importantly, an MCC alumni. He does have a day job. And for that, he is the lead of climate adaptation at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Green Municipal Fund, where he works to enable local governments to create low carbon, climate resilient communities. And then in his spare time, he is now, awesome to see, an expert consultant with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, where he wrote the climate resilient asset management chapter of the UN Handbook on managing infrastructure assets for sustainable development. Awesome. Next, I have Jade Schofield. That's right. I have German relatives, and I always want to. Schofield. There is the British pronunciation of a German name. Damn Brits, there. And importantly, she's an MCC instructor, so that there's a connection there. And Jade serves as the Director of Climate and Sustainability at Delphi, which is a B Corp certified Canadian sustainability consulting firm. And before joining Delphi, she passed with Dustin a lot at a municipal role for 12 years, leading sustainability and climate change division. And she had a whole long list of climate change expertise, which I'm not going to read. But the last one I do want to emphasize, because the last one is really important and you don't see it enough, is including equity in climate action. So that's an addition that maybe she'll speak to as well. Alison Traub. Alison is a program manager at NRCan's Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation Division, which our university and our faculty has had connections with, partnerships. Don Lemon, Fiona, Pam, 20 years, maybe even longer. For some people, Brian Mills and Linda would have even been longer than I had, where she focuses on a diverse facets of climate change adaptation, including the skills and development and capacity building, portfolio too. Prior to joining NRCan, Alison was at the climate change file at the Ministry of Energy here in Ontario. So both sides. And Tricia Williams. Tricia is the Director of Research, Evaluation, and Knowledge Mobilization at the Future Skills Center, based in Toronto. Everybody's there? Everybody's. Which specializes in the future of work, digital economies, skills development, and gender. Previously, Tricia worked at the MasterCard Foundation, focusing on youth employment and digital economy research across Africa and Indigenous communities in Canada. and she held policy roles for the federal government and supported immigrant rights and community associations in Canada and in US and Haiti. So as you can see, really diverse panel, diverse backgrounds, diverse area of expertise, diverse areas of practice, and diverse perspectives on this question of skills gap, skills training. So with that, I'm going to give you each 5 minutes. Set my timer. And I'm going to start with you, Bonnie, and give you the floor first. We've got a good connection, and one never knows when these can be lost. So I'm going to open the floor to you first, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for coming. I'll tell you that I see the panel and moderators, so we'll see how this works. A big thank you to all the organizers, especially for having me along remotely. Always a trick, but this is quite the outstanding panel of climate practitioners, and I'm ready for a really cool talk on what climate work looks like and what the skills we need are. I'm calling in from unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe land, and I'm glad to see that centered up front so we can remember that climate literacy isn't just a question of skills, but it's values and worldview and who we are as people in connection to the land. 3 quick things to know about me. I'm here as mentioned because I had the privilege of working with Dr. Sarah Birch at your Climate Waterloo Institute to produce a course called Applying Climate Literacy Foundations, a 101 course for the whole federal public service, the purpose of which is to have public servants identify the ways in which their work affects the climate and the ways the changing climate is affecting and will affect their work. So secondly, as also mentioned, I'm working at Environment and Climate Change Canada as part of the team that just renewed the Strategic Environmental and Economic Assessment Cabinet Directive, to the effect that all cabinet level decisions, all your budget choices, all your memos to cabinet, all your Treasury Board submissions, and importantly, all regulations will be informed by climate, nature, and economic considerations, along with some neat process enhancements we're really proud of, like a central review and some transparency and more to the point, some capacity building. So the third thing to know is that this team is right now in the midst of many projects that all aim to get at what are the skills and competencies public servants need across all the operations of government to do this well. That is to build and exercise the muscle of centering climate and nature in all our work. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Too. Let's see. Yes. All right. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm actually really glad they didn't scroll down to the bottom of my bio because they would have seen that I went to Guelph, and which I probably wouldn't have been invited. So, so I'm really fortunate because I'm a big fan of Waterloo, and we've had some conversations over the last couple of years, and been really watching all the stuff you're talking about, Jeff, in terms of the commitment to sustainability across the institution. So it's a big privilege to be here. So I'm with the Future Skills Center, where I lead our research, evaluation, knowledge mobilization, which is a mouthful. And disclaimer, I'm an anthropologist, so I think that counts as diversity on this panel probably. So we have an exciting mandate from the federal government. We're funded through the federal government in an area of provincial and territorial jurisdiction, which is around skills and labor. And for the last 5 years, we were only established 5 years ago. And since then, we've done 375 projects from coast to coast to coast across Canada. That's both research and innovation pilots around skills and training. And a couple years ago, we started dialing in a little bit more to some of the necessary skills and labor issues related to the coming climate transitions and current ones already underway. And we started doing more research on this. And, I'm going to give you a few statistics, and they're not going to be comforting. Because really what we found is we expect that 18% of jobs over the next 10 years will be disrupted by automation writ large, just regardless of climate transitions. A lot of automation disruptions. And even jobs that are still kind of there, at least half of them, the skills within those jobs will change. As we heard, even from the federal public service, so your job title may be the same, but the skills that you need within that job are changing. We also expect that over 3 million jobs over the next 10 years will be disrupted by climate and energy transitions. And that's in a labor force of 21 million or so. So that's a pretty significant number of jobs that are just directly linked to climate transitions. So I was speaking to Electricity Canada this week and the chief human resource officers of all the leading public utilities. So Hydro-Quebec, Hydro One, BC Power, and, between now and 2028, the electricity sector alone needs to grow by 28,000 positions. And then the years after that, there's another thousands in order to expand our electrical grid. So we're talking about huge demands on labor and skills. Now, the scary part for me is that so far the climate conversations have not really been paying attention to this, other than to say we need more people. Great, and somebody better figure that out. Right. And then you have the workforce and training people, that I'm more connected to those communities and those ecosystems, and they're starting to clue into this. Right. And they're saying we need to do something more here. But there isn't quite yet the coming together of those conversations and to say in every climate plan, there needs to be a skills and labor plan. We need to have this absolutely integrated. So we're doing a number of interesting things. I won't go into too much, but I will mention one in particular. Across those 375, there are a few that are very much focused on, climate and green skills. And one of them, we've been a good example of the kinds of things we've been able to do has been to build with BCIT, so British Columbia Institute of Technology, a digital twin for training, highly secure electricity operators in a remote environment. And what we're really excited about is this has really big inclusion potential when so many Indigenous communities face it, kind of running their own little grids and being able to access really advanced training from within their own community, because that's a hybrid or a remote connectivity digital twin environment. And we're seeing tremendous uptake of those kinds of things. It's the kinds of innovations that we need. And again, I'm just really saluting this program for producing people who can think that future-oriented way. I love the idea of thinking with a lens of like 30 years ahead from now. And then what can we actually do now to get going? So that's it.
I'm going to start this off with a little bit of an expanded bio as well. So it's right out of the MCC program that I joined that's better. All right. Joined the municipal workforce as a scrappy, idealistic climate action instigator, and was able to pair over a 2-year period working with a couple of municipalities the knowledge I gained through both an undergrad in geography here and the Master of Climate Change program with a better understanding of how the inner workings of how municipalities operate. The priorities, that sausage making aspect, balancing political priorities with financial mechanisms, aspects like that. And it's been over a course since, with my career of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, that filling the climate change skills gap has really been my personal mandate. For a number of years, I was in a capacity development position, really intended to make climate adaptation, readiness, risk reduction, a core, almost boring aspect of how municipalities work. For the some of you might be aware of this stat, municipalities have ownership of about 60% of all of the tangible capital assets, infrastructure owned in Canada, and we rely on that for everything. Anytime your sewer backs up, your toilets don't flush, the lights go out, you're backed up in traffic, in Ottawa, where I live, the train isn't running. There's a connection to municipal infrastructure. There's also municipalities also have either direct control or indirect influence over more than half of the emissions in this country. They play a really important role of climate action, but there is that significant skill gap. Communities have done things the way they have had to, or the way they have previously done things for a long time. Inertia is a real thing. And there's a lot of regulatory challenges around financing, around things like municipal legislation, land use planning, and controls imposed by them by other orders of government. So over a number of years, my role really has been to take some of the lessons that I have learned in here and take lessons from other leaders across the country and help propagate them to institutionalize those best practices, normalize them so that climate action becomes that more boring aspect. And most recently have been involved in the development or leading the development of new climate adaptation programming coming out of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, where I'm really excited to note that we've really built in a mandate to push municipalities further than they've ever gone, most of them, on issues like equity, making them requirements associated with some of these projects, where we're going to need folks like Jade to really share their expertise and change the paradigm where adaptation to a substantial degree has been largely or to a disproportionate degree benefiting those with the highest degrees of personal resilience already, and sharing those benefits with those who could most need them.
Everything Dustin said and more. So thanks everybody for having me. I do feel like I'm also gate crashing. I formally graduated from the UK in environmental science from the University of Plymouth. I actually came to Canada as a result of an exchange program, and I had the choice between going to Trent University in Peterborough or Winnipeg. Had never been to Canada in my life, and I looked at the winter temperatures and picked Trent. So that's how I ended up in Canada. Fell in love with this beautiful province, so much so that I actually moved here full time and did my master's, again, not at Waterloo, but at Toronto Metropolitan University in environmental applied management and science. I've been in this field now for 18 years. So climate change programs were really non-existent at that time. It was baked into environmental science and environmental applied science. And I always had a passion for our community. I had a passion for the weather, and I had a passion for leading change, which trajected me on a journey towards working in the climate change space. I've since had the privilege of working in the not-for-profit, the government, and currently in the consulting realm. So I've got a good 360 lens on the three main sectors, if we talk about it broadly. I entered this space in the not-for-profit sector working for the Eden Project, which is an NGO based out of the UK and environmental education charity. They've been doing a ton of things globally, so I recommend you check them out. If you're ever in the UK, I'm going to still give them a shout out. And they really, grounded me in the realm of, this is an international issue that needs local action. That was my first stopgap. I then moved into municipal government, and I've actually got to work alongside some of the MCC first year grads. Suzanne, I'm going to give you a shout out. In the municipal space, I was brought in on a contract with the city of, which is now the city of Richmond Hill. It was a town back then. But Suzanne came in and did her co-op placement as she was transitioning. Sorry, Suzanne, I'm super making you blush right now, but you hooted Dustin, so this is payback. So this is just how long this is kind of transpired, but also the impact that this university has had in the space. I stayed in municipal government for 12 years, working for 3 different towns. And for 2 of them, I started the sustainability conversation. Like, it was not part of our mandate. This was brand new. The entry-level conversation was recycling. The blue bin conversation, tree planting was starting to become a bit more of our mandate. I left the municipal government in 2019, having just wrapped up my 3rd resiliency strategy, long-term climate risk strategy, my first municipal carbon budget. It was the 2nd only in Canada at the time. Has also had implemented the 2nd green development standard after the City of Toronto. So this space has come a really long way. That's what I'm trying to say here is in 12 years of municipal government, from really talking about like, please put your cans in the blue bin, to talking about a cut price on carbon for every single service that a municipality offers. One of the big conversations that kept coming up here, though, is how do we do this in a fair and equitable way? Climate change impacts the most vulnerable populations more so than anybody else. That means the low income, the newcomers, those that are older, those that are younger, those that are Black or have a visible minority. Like, they are disproportionately impacted by changing climate. And still to this day, a lot of our climate change plans do not take that into impact, and in some cases are actually even stretching this gap. And so I personally, my mandate is to try and close that. So transitioning into the consulting space, I work for a company called Delphi. I previously worked for a larger firm. My goal was to help everybody. Versus working for one community, I now have the pleasure of working with pretty much every sector, nationally and internationally, develop climate change policies, do engineering climate risk assessments, develop carbon budgets, green infrastructure, nature-based solutions. But the one thing that is a common denominator in all the work I do is, like, when I'm thinking about those tangible actions, is like, are we doing this in a way that is fair? Are we giving people that need a step up, the step up that they need in order to live a healthy and prosperous life, not just for this generation, but for their future generations as well? So this ties into my final hat that I wear. We talked about my helping the youth on, but I also volunteer as the president for the Ontario Urban Forest Council. So you see me out and about a lot, working with local municipalities, working with academia, working with practitioners to really close the green infrastructure equity gap that we have here in Ontario. So really making sure people have access to good green space, because it provides, the resilience services that we need, i.e. Whether it's shading or flood management, but it's also, it gives access to people to have high quality communities, because everyone deserves that. So that's me.
Thanks. Wow, it's can you hear me? It's hard to add anything to what's already been said, but it's really my pleasure to be here today to speak as a representative from Natural Resources Canada. I'm from the Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation Division there, and I'm privileged to be able to share some personal perspectives today, as well as some perspectives that were informed by conversations from my esteemed colleagues at NRCan. So you'll be hearing sort of a input from a collective today with me as the mouthpiece. So yeah, I really appreciate that. A little bit about me. I'm going to join the crowd here, and I didn't actually graduate from the University of Waterloo. Full disclosure, I'm also a Guelph grad. I did spend a lot of time in the city of Waterloo visiting folks just kind of down the road. And I also hold a master's degree in environmental health from the University of Toronto. I first joined the climate change space officially as part of my career about 4 years ago in 2020. Where I joined a climate change adaptation team. And that was actually the first time that I'd ever heard of the term climate change adaptation. I had heard of mitigation, and as many of us know, mitigation is really kind of the one that gets a lot of attention, and then adaptation tends to be sort of the less funded, and also the kind of aspect of climate change that gets less attention, but it's equally important, and there's so many opportunities to achieve synergies between the two. From there, I moved on to lead the climate change adaptation file at Ontario's Ministry of Energy, where I really tried to bring climate change to the forefront of discussions to think about how can we progress towards both a low carbon future and a resilient future. because it's fantastic if we can electrify everything and really reduce our carbon footprint. But again, we have to look at the people that we're serving, and we're not serving them if it's low carbon, but the power is out all the time because of the impacts of climate change. And then I had the privilege of joining Natural Resources Canada in November of last year, actually, so fairly recently. And I'm part of, as I mentioned, the Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation Division, which was formed in 1998. And we partner really closely with all natural resource sectors. We partner with non-governmental organizations, municipalities, to really try and kind of meet a variety of needs in the area of adaptation. And we also run a lot of funding programs to try and kind of put money into the hands of the people doing adaptation on the ground. Because as was mentioned by the other panelists, climate change is an international problem, but there needs to be local action. And so as the federal government, some of the most impactful work that we can do is putting money into the hands of practitioners and letting them, the experts on their own space and the experts on their own assets kind of implement that work. So I think a really key success story that I can think of from the division is we ran a BRACE program, which is a co-funding program where we worked with municipalities and communities to implement actions that would improve their resilience. So one example of that for the University of Alberta started an internship program where they placed interns in climate change jobs and industry, and that really had a huge impact both for the students and for the industry. Also on our team, we have a group specifically focused on climate change skills. So looking at this skills gap, working with natural resource sectors and other partners to identify what are the skills missing both in government but also in these industries. So one thing that I was thinking about when preparing for this panel was the question, what would success look like? If we were to bridge the climate change skills gap, what would that mean? And I think echoing a lot of what we've heard from other panelists, to me, I think what that would mean is that the climate change conversation is not just being had by climate change professionals and people who have a credential in climate change, but rather that it's being had in every single sector, in the finance sector, in the building sector, by psychologists and who are dealing with, some of the mental health impacts of climate change. It really needs to be a conversation that's happening in every sector, not as an afterthought and not as a separate consideration, but integrated into all of the decision making. Yeah, so I'll leave it there.
There we go. Thank you so much. And so some key points already, all on the front lines in different ways. I think the importance of lifelong learning and partnerships, hopefully you'll speak to that a little bit more as well. And Brace 2 is coming, when's the next Brace? Oh, not even gonna do that, okay. But other, health, other professions, absolutely critical. That's partly with Jeff's help where we're moving to in here at Waterloo. And I just saw Yale has just made mandatory climate change courses for their health professional. When you come out of their health program, you've actually had to have some mandatory climate change as well. So it's finding its ways into different places as well. So I'm going to start with, I've got a couple questions I'd love to ask you. And I'm going to start with the one, you've all seen a range of different analyses on skills gaps, talent gaps. Tricia, your shop's done some of them. But what are your respective thoughts on to what extent does that talent gap or those skills gap pose a barrier to moving as fast and as deep that we need to? Oops, I just cut myself out. On climate change, does it pose a barrier to actually Canada achieving some of the pledges and targets that we've put out there? So who wants to go first? And Bonnie, when you want to chime in, just wave because I can see you up here, and I'll get you the mic too.
Well, we released a paper last year in partnership with the Smart Prosperity Institute, and we modeled 3 different potential pathways to get to net zero. And those of you in the room, you'll understand those pathways much more than I will, right? But when you talk to experts and you figure out, okay, what are the different kind of choices we make, whether it's carbon capture or the offsets, like all those things in different ways. And in every single scenario, when we modeled out the job and labor dimensions, everyone was a net job gain. like more jobs in every pathway, which is really counter to most of like the common thinking is that, oh, to be, to reach our targets, we're going to lose jobs and there's an economic cost to that. And so I think that we have a lot to do to kind of unpack that and do some myth busting around that. But again, the story is more about change, not less. So it's absolutely tied. Like if we don't have those people, then we absolutely are at risk of not reaching those targets.
Yeah, I'll add to that. And even in the time that I've been in my career since graduating, I've noticed quite a few more climate experts coming out of the field. You see expertise in both mitigation and adaptation side far more today than in the not too distant past. But there are big systems that we are trying to change to really align both the low carbon and resilient future that we're imagining. Big systems change slowly, and you need a lot of stakeholders at the table occasionally to push them in the right direction. I've been tangentially involved in, for instance, discussions around the 2030 building code, which by and large can have a very industry heavy table pushing certain priorities, and it does take different skill sets. Insurance, engineers, energy planners, and the like, really trying to identify these other priorities that have transformative potential, but without that scattering of the expertise across multiple different important sectors, it's hard to see those big changes that touch so many aspects of our lives. So while I think we're making a lot of progress in seeing climate change as a more constant thing across the economy and job positions, we do still have a ways to go.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. I would agree wholeheartedly with what we've heard. I think we're seeing more and more demand for climate change. More and more industries, as a result of really great policy, are starting to think about climate change where you may not have thought about climate change before. And I'll give an example of how policy has actually transcended into really great job creation. And that is public climate risk disclosures, for example, with our financial institutions. The mandatory requirement that every large bank disclose their climate risks, whether it relates to the investments or their physical assets, has meant that every single bank in this country now has to have a really knowledgeable climate change team that is tied to accounting, because at the end of the day, that financial lens is really big. So, there is a skills gap with that, because that policy happened without necessarily having the folks out there ready to do this work. So there's a gap in the sense of like sometimes the demand is there before the folks are ready. And on the other side, like we've also seen, passionate people that are trying to get into this space, and it's been hugely competitive. And the NGO space is a great example of that, where everyone is chasing those not-for-profit opportunities, and it's very competitive. So I think my key takeaway to this is like you are really in an exceptional position where you don't have to be like the folks here where you've had to be a bit of I call it the Jill of everything, master of none. You have the opportunity to still dabble in a little bit of everything, or really hone in a particular sector that interests you the most, and you will be bringing instrumental value regardless of what you do.
Yeah, I think that covers a lot of what I was thinking. But I think from NRCan's perspective, when I was speaking to my colleagues, like we are absolutely seeing this skills gap, and we are seeing it in a lot of natural resource sectors, and a lot of among our partners. And I think the skills that and I think that kind of shows up in a lot of ways. And Jade was alluding to the disclosure regulations, and so there's a bit of supply and demand. Regulation can drive a demand for increased expertise on climate change. But as she also mentioned, sometimes these policies come into place before folks are ready. So for example, with disclosure, what we see a lot of is instead of maybe what we had hoped, which is, people like accountants and bank managers would kind of upskill and learn about doing this disclosure process, we're seeing a lot of outsourcing. So, they'll hire a specific expert in this field or a consultant to do this one time, and then they'll never have to think about it again. But over time, as this becomes kind of more normalized, we do expect to see sort of an increase in this upskilling and adding these skills to the repertoire of people they're hiring, and also introducing kind of new training for folks who are already on the job. Yeah, and I think a big part of when I think about the skills gap as well, I think a big part that maybe folks will relate to is a lot of the time when you are the climate change person embedded on a team doing something kind of else or something larger, a lot of the time you're having to kind of explain yourself and like sell to them, like this is why you should think about climate change. Whereas if that conversation, became the default, like of course we have to think about it, you save so much time and effort to kind of really focus on like, okay, that's great. Obviously we have to think about it. What should we do? Where do we go from here?
Alison,
Segue.
spot.
Bonnie, do you want to comment on that? That's a great segue into you before I move on.
Absolutely. I sort of wanted to hear what Alison said first before I, sold out the public service a little bit here, that oftentimes she's absolutely spot on that the mandates come before the capacity. And you've seen massive climate action in the last 5 to 7 years, your emissions reduction plan, your national adaptation strategy, biodiversity efforts, greening government, and now us as well, all new decisions needing this analysis. And I think it is becoming clear across the board that HR is the top barrier to effective climate action. Not just for the public service, but certainly the government is no different. In my experience, it's really challenging to measure the climate talent gap, but every proxy, as you've cited, suggests it is significant. I would just add that we ran a small survey to understand sort of climate and nature organizational capacity, and find that only about half of public servants are confident in their organizations, and only about a quarter of them in their individual readiness to meet these climate challenges. So unfortunately, I think there really is still a demand for core awareness raising around sort of the science, the vocabulary, the range of impacts, and the frameworks for solutions. So I want to be in a conversation about professional competency building, but I still see sort of business as usual pretty widely. As Alison says, you get one climate expert and you'll see a lot of repetition of this core basic material. But I also want to add that we are not going to hire our way out of this, with the public service being sort of 300 to 400,000 strong at this point. There will have to be internal professional development to deal with the scale and speed required. So that's partially about competencies, but I do also want to see better informal training as well, by which I mean sort of mentoring, mutual support, networks, that sort of effort. Thanks.
Bonnie, can I grab one of those mics just before I move on to the next question? Where did Shaniqua go? Oh, there was a. This one's tapping. A quick comment in the back.
2, 3.
Okay.
You hold it close to your. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Okay. So Heather, did you want to say something quick before I go on?
Yeah, I can repeat the question, Bonnie, if you can hear. The question is, while we recognize there's a skills gap, we are also seeing, new grads still struggling to find work within the sector and is there any advice we can provide? And I can completely agree with that. It is a really strange transitional time for the climate change sector, where we are starting to see increased demand. What we're seeing a lot of that demand, we're seeing a lot of that demand taking place is at the executive level. We're seeing a lot of demand for senior level roles because this is new for people, and those big decision makers, those that are most at risk from, not doing the climate work correct, tend to sit higher up in the organization. So they tend to be naturally looking for those with, a lot of experience in the space, which, to be honest, there isn't a lot of. You folks in here are really some of the most experienced already. This is still a very small and growing sector, and it's also a very new sector. So in terms of advice, I would say, first of all, don't give up. I came to this country, I'd had 7 years of experience in this space. I went and did my master's and I couldn't find a job. And I took a job at Old Navy, 3 o'clock in the morning, changing displays. And it was heartbreaking. I'm not going to lie. I nearly went home. I nearly gave up on this whole idea. And it was tough. And I put out thousands and thousands and thousands of CVs. But one stuck, and it was this town of Richmond Hill. And I was so lucky to get back into the space, and it was on a contract. So that would be my advice, is like, don't just look for the long game right away. Those short introductory contract placement positions can really open a door to so many opportunities. I'd also want to highlight that you may not land the perfect job right away, and that this space is one where you can constantly, I hate to use this word because it's a post-COVID one, but pivot. You might go into a role, and my job at Richmond Hill was focused on air quality and waste. And I knew I wanted to do more in the energy and climate change space and natural environment. And just by getting my foot in the door, I got to work closely with really fantastic folk that helped me move into the area that I wanted to. So those are two pieces of advice. Is one, don't look for perfection right off the bat. And two, don't turn down a contract because they often open up a good door.
I want to really quickly build on that. I want to really quickly build on that last point of starting in a position that isn't quite the right fit. I do have other colleagues who are interested in getting into the climate change space as well, starting in corporate environments that had nothing to do with climate change, but was a founding member of the Corporate Sustainability Working Group. And over the 5 years they have been there, they have been at the leading edge of getting that corporation to do waste audits, to do their own energy monitoring, to look at capital upgrades for efficiency, and have really tried to change the internal culture to make it an organization where, oh, this is something we should actually pay attention to.
I'll jump in as well. I think, a key word that kind of sticks out to me with that question is the importance of literacy and climate literacy. And I think sometimes it's important, I think all these points are really excellent. You might come into a job that's not directly climate related, and you can kind of, pivot and turn it into a role that's more climate focused. And part of that is going to be leveraging your soft skills and remembering that when you're communicating, you are not communicating potentially with another graduate with a climate change credential, and they might not have the same level of climate literacy as you. So trying to kind of come at it with using the language of, whatever industry it is you're trying to break into. And that's kind of, I think, a hugely important skill that's maybe underappreciated in the climate change space. Is you need to be able to speak the language of climate change, but you also need to be able to speak the language of government, of the energy sector, of the finance sector, to kind of make that connection and make sure that you're getting folks on the same page and kind of all speaking about the same thing, so that you don't kind of come in and have all these great ideas and then you leave and they say, oh, I don't know, that person sounded smart, but I don't know what they were saying. And the other thing I'll say is, maybe this is not immediately obvious by how scared I am of talking into this mic, but I'm an introvert. And I think one of the biggest things that's important in kind of any sort of job search is also the networking. So send off your CVs, but also talk to people who work there. It doesn't have to be the hiring manager. It can just, you can reach out on LinkedIn. It really goes a long way, and you get to know the vocabulary that they use, the kind of things they do day to day. And it's valuable even if it doesn't get you a job, to always be continually building your network. So that would be my big piece of advice.
Yeah, yeah, I was exactly going to say career guidance is really helpful, and that's something we're looking to a lot. I think I will, like yesterday, I was at the Canadian Economics Association and we were talking about productivity and skills, and like there's a big focus right now on productivity in Canada again. It comes around every few years. And we're doing some research right now where we could attribute at least 7% of the productivity problem right now in Canada, or the gap between Canada and the US in terms of productivity numbers, is directly attributed to skills. And I think what we're seeing amongst the private sector and employers and hiring is a movement away from looking at credentials and towards skills. Now, credentials are still valuable because they help you build skills, but just slapping on there and say, I have a master's and this isn't enough. Can you articulate what you can actually do in a very concrete way? You know how to problem solve, you know how to look at things, you understand these things, like documenting your competencies and skills in addition to I hold a piece of paper. That's a really valuable piece of paper, but it's more than that. And absolutely putting on their social skills, collaboration, network, problem solving, judgment. All those things are super valuable. Curiosity, willingness to learn. An employer usually won't expect you to know everything on day one. In fact, they assume you won't. And my problem employees are the ones who think they know too much, to be honest. They're a problem. The ones who are like hungry to learn and say, I have a skill set of knowing how to learn and I'm here to do that. That's great.
Bonnie, do you want to jump in before I ask another question?
The panel has done a wonderful job on this one. Just reminding, I think we all believe that all jobs are climate jobs, and Dustin did a great job of describing how that works out. I guess it's about saying that there is no perfect spot, no perfect blank page to sort of start from fresh and create the perfect solutions. So I guess as a new grad, wherever you are, whether you're horrified about what's going on in the room or what, I would just wish that you realize as soon as possible that you are in that room. And I wish for you to be the culture builders, the capacity builders, and to really keep everything on the table in terms of pushing for transformation. I just note that even in the last 2 weeks, even the Transition Accelerator is now saying it's not so much of an energy transition, but an energy transformation. This is the world that's changing very, very fast, and wherever you are, be there.
Just cognizant of the time, I'm going to ask one more big one, and then you can go off in all kinds of different ways with it, probably. So, in the topic of partnerships has come up a few times already. So, thinking forward to 2030, the next 5 years, whatever time frame, what are some of the strategic partnerships that we need in Canada to bridge this gap? If you can comment on what role universities can play in that. But the second part of that question, is there a country that we can look to they're doing it right, or they're out in the lead, somebody we can learn from? If not, that's okay. We're not behind necessarily, but if there is somebody in that leadership position, who might that be?
I would love to see more collaboration with employers up front at universities. It happens on the back end when they say, please hire our students. They're great. Right. And I think we have basically, and I'm mindful of that, like the university is not just like a job creation thing. And these are debates I have all the time with, people in my life who are like, we're educating citizens. And I'm like, yeah, well, they got to work too. Right. So I get that there's a healthy tension there. But I would say, just to your point about like people graduating and not getting jobs, like there's some mismatch there. And like Canada actually has the highest post-secondary completion rate compared to OECD peers, the highest. And yet, we still have skill gaps, labor shortages, mismatches. So something isn't quite connecting between labor supply and labor demand. And I think like the universities tend to rely on like program advisory committees are kind of like the mandated way, and it's kind of built for another labor market, another era. So I think we need to reinvent what that looks like for the university and the designing curriculum, designing programs, and making sure that we, have students and graduates that are just absolutely ready to have success because people want to do things. So
I can just say one quick word on that.
please.
So from the MCC program perspective, we've worked with Health Canada, Peter Barry, who couldn't be here today, in part to do that. And then with the Climate Service Center, the same thing. If you wanted to hire one of our students, what would they need to know? And we had that conversation in the beginning of that course development, but we'd love to do more of it. And so if there are people willing to have that kind of partnership, that's the type of communication we want to have as well.
I was going to jump in on that as a course instructor for carbon accounting and management. I know it was the best course you took in your program. We are currently, really we're opening up that program and revamping it. And I have the luxury working in the private sector, working with a range of different sectors to understand what the needs are on the job side of things versus what is being taught currently in those programs. And the fact that the university has reached out to folks like myself to support these programs, I think is really an indicator of how the academia is transitioning to get you job ready when you leave your program and go into the working world. So I think that's super exciting. On the partnerships side of things, I wanted to highlight a couple of things, and Dustin alluded to it. Volunteering is something that we don't talk about very much anymore. I personally volunteer and run a side organization, the Ontario Urban Forest Council, and it has connected me to so many opportunities, and you don't need to have a ton of experience or ton of skills to get yourself out there to get connected. And I know we've had youth come into the organization, sit on the board, and been hired out through a volunteer lens. So there is really like interesting ways to put yourself out there, give yourself your authentic lens, make you stand out from everybody else, to help close those skill gaps. On the skill gap piece for Canada, we definitely are running into a lot of challenges, and it's a bit of this chicken and egg between policy, disaster response, and getting industry up to speed. A lot of the actions that need to take place, we have the solutions on the shelf. We just don't have the people that understand how to use those solutions and implement them. And I think if you can come in at that side of like, you understand the technology and you need to help, it's all about that capacity building and that education. You don't need 20 years of experience to be able to do that. That is something right out of school you can do with good communication skills and good networking skills.
I'll say one more thing, and I think, this is not necessarily directed at the University of Waterloo, because I know you have a big practical component to not just this program, but a lot of other programs. But climate change, adaptation in particular, when I think about it, it's a very practical field. Like you're implementing solutions that are going to affect individuals living their daily lives, commuting, living in their homes if they're warm, like cool enough during heat waves, things like that. So having, a practical component like a field course or an internship or some kind of capstone project where you work with industry, I think really kind of helps put things in perspective that the work you're doing and the theory that you've learned is being applied, and it will be kind of affecting everyday life on the ground. And I think also, depending on the partnerships you can build with rural communities, Indigenous communities, like that can help put equity as well in the forefront of the practitioner conversation and the practitioner thought, as well as kind of ensuring that there's an equity lens when, recruiting for the program to make sure that those voices are at the table.
Kind of 2 points I want to speak to. And the first is just to kind of re-congratulate the University of Waterloo on the graduate diploma in climate change. It's something I was thrilled to see because of that cross-disciplinary nature. Like I said, we're seeing more of those climate change experts populating the workforce, but seeing the potential for someone with kinesiology and climate change, political science and climate change, civil engineering and climate change is just exponentially increases that talent pool of where they might not have the deep understanding necessary. They know to ask the right questions and who know to like scope it into what a project might look like and go out and talk to the right people after that. So I think that's a really critical first step in building partnerships across sectors and industries and really the scale of the economy. The other point about countries to look at is I would say that it really depends on what you're looking at. I can think of a number of countries that do better in something than us. The Netherlands for active mobility or flood planning aspects like that. Singapore with the massive integration of natural infrastructure across built landscapes. South Africa had one of the best social mobilizations of resilience when they were approaching day zero of water availability in Cape Town that anyone has ever seen in the climate space. So I think it really is dependent on what is the area you're interested in and what is the question you really want to explore.
You want to jump in?
Super briefly, first to ask all of the other panelists for coffee dates next time you're in Ottawa, because this was sensational and the time flew really, really quickly. I would also congratulate you, Waterloo, on the core training across disciplines. I want to see all new grads coming in, understanding the breadth of cascading effects, understanding to center and follow Indigenous leadership. The inseparability of mitigation and adaptation, but mostly to foreground nature in all that we're doing. And I would tell you that in all of our new projects, every step we're taking, everyone we're talking to is saying climate and nature in the same breath. So as we're looking forward and thinking of next projects, whether it's for an executive audience, whether it's for sort of core training or whether it's for competencies, I'd want to see nature-based solutions and biodiversity loss and the interlinkages between climate change and nature pretty central to all of that. So I'll leave it at that. Wow, that time flew. Thank you everyone for tolerating a hybrid meeting after all this time.
So I'm just going to quickly open the floor. Any questions? We've had a few comments as we've moved along, but any burning questions that the audience has?
Community enough, you know, you're all very lovely. You're lovely. But I would say in general, like I'm thinking of like we did a project with Eco Canada. Many of you probably know them, on kind of developing skills framework for the blue economy. And it's I think one of the things we've been really focusing on is centering the equity conversations, you know, and I would say it's kind of to the point of what the panel's already said of like making sure that that's front of mind. Like it's not just what are the impacts, but who's going to be impacted, why, how, you know, and putting that forefront. So that's something I think we see that a lot of kind of more technical professions tend to diminish.
I'm going to jump in there and I'm going to put my ex-political hat and say political participation. I think that's something that's really lacking in a lot of developed nations. We really need you to speak up when not great policy comes down the pipeline or when great policy comes down the pipeline, so that there is more of it. We really have seen youth in particular are the least likely to vote. They don't, they probably don't know the Environment Bill of Rights exists, or the Environmental Bill of Registry exists. When provincial policy comes out, you know, are they following Natural Resources Canada when they have consultation on really exciting new funding programs or strategies? Like, that is something I would say is missing, particularly with folks like you. So speak up, speak out, don't be afraid. I think that is going to be hugely impactful to making sure this conversation is top of mind for everybody. And to follow on Bonnie's conversation around nature first, but equity first as well.
So yes, and the one learning, or one lesson learned I took from my time working with the City of Windsor is I was working on a community energy plan, rather transformative for an industrial city, of wanting quite deep emissions reductions, had a lot of different sectors involved, potential for a big disruption in the city. And the first question we were getting from council is, okay, but what's it going to cost? So being able to communicate in financial and economic literacy, pairing that with climate adaptation or climate action, is a really important skill set to be able to speak in more of the speak in terms more than just the like social good and need to do this, and pair it with the paradigm of action that some people are looking for.
Bonnie, do you want to jump in? Nope. All right.
I want to go out in the sunshine again.
All right. So I'm looking at the time, and I think we could chat for another hour. And luckily, we have a reception. We can go out and continue the conversation. So, if you can please join me in thanking the panel one more time for their time on a Saturday. Hopefully, you can all connect with Bonnie in Ottawa and make that coffee chat happen. So I just have a couple other quick thank yous to wrap us up as well. One to Miriam, who is still here. Chanique is out in the hallway. Thank you for a seamless organization of event. Thank you so much for that. To our current dean, Bruce, who couldn't make it today, but also our previous deans, Jean Andre, many of you will know, but Andre Waugh before that as well. They took a risk in making these climate change programs happen. And if that didn't happen, none of this would have actually happened. So we need that leadership. Jeff talked to that point as well. To our professors, our instructors, our staff, especially Tricia, our new grad will partners, I saw Chantel somewhere, who have made, there she is in the back, make the program what it is. I was going to ask you all to stand up, but then Johanna would blush and there'd be a price on my head after that. So yeah, so we won't do that. And finally, I just want a personal thank you to all of our current students, but also all of our alumni as well. 15 years ago, when we first chatted, what does a dedicated climate change program look like? We knew the biggest difference we could make on climate change was to create that program where hopefully hundreds of uber talented students, graduates, alumni would go out and they would drive change in ways that we never expected, have new types of networks, new types of expertise, and you've made that vision a reality. So a personal thank you from me, and I thank all of our faculty for all that you've done so far. Thank you, and